President Barack Hussein Obama is visiting Cuba right now. He went there yesterday, March 20th, 2016. He's going to be there for 3 days, and it's a historic occasion because we're normalizing our relationship. The United States government and the government of Cuba, we're normalizing our relationship for better trade and better exchange of goods and services, and just, it's good all around. So, yeah, so Barack Hussein Obama is going to Cuba, and, Fox News, of course, they're going to be like, well, he's a communist, right? Obama basically just coming right out and declaring himself a communist. And, that's fucking stupid. It's important because of the economic system, but it's even more important because it's the last vestige of the Cold War. The Cold War is now over. It's over. It's done with. We can celebrate.
We have observed that in the 15 months that have passed, since the decision was made to establish our...
When it comes to American foreign policy, if there's a departure of how we've been treating the world, we always change the name, the world, we always change the name to the President Doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, the Bush Doctrine, the Obama Doctrine, and people are like, well, what's the Obama Doctrine? And I think it's right, actually, no drama Obama. So that's, he doesn't rush off the war, so that might piss off some people, but he just doesn't want to get it, bogged down into bullshit. So it turns out that the blockade still exists. There's still a blockade going on today. A blockade. Meaning nobody can come in or go out. Cuba is its own self-contained.
The blockade stands as the most important obstacle to our economic development and the well-being of the Cuban people. That's why its removal will be of the essence to normalize bilateral relations. And actually, it will also bring benefits to the Cuban emigres who wish the best for their families and their country. In order to move forward towards normalization, it will also be necessary to return the territory illegally occupied by Guantanamo Naval Base.
And he actually has been drone striking, and he started the Libya war and in Ukraine, Somalia, Yemen. So, he is he's still maintaining the empire. So, no drama Obama. I'm not for sure what actually his foreign policy is. But whatever, no drama Obama. That's what I think the Obama doctrine is. No drama Obama. Do a minimalist. Do the least amount necessary to maintain the security.
Diplomatic relations. We have obtained concrete results. We were able to resume direct postal exchanges, and we signed an agreement to resume commercial flights. We have signed 2 memorandums of understanding on the protection of the environment and maritime areas, and another one to secure the safety of
in Havana. In Havana. I want to talk a little bit about the history of Cuba, the relationship between America and Cuba. So let's just go back for a second to 1962. Now, there was a late October 1962, there was a man named Vasily Arkhipov. So Vasily Arkhipov saved the entire world. Vasily Arkhipov. So Vasily Arkhipov. We should know exactly who this guy's name is, okay? So there was an incident where the Navy was being sort of antagonistic to some Soviet submarines, B-59, who was at the blockade line because the United States put a blockade around Cuba, said you can't enter, and then the Soviet Union was coming towards Cuba, and they had nuclear weapons on the submarine. The submarine had nuclear weapons, and the United States government was going to try. The House would call this day Black Saturday. The U.S. Navy dropped a series of signaling depth charges, practice depth charges, the size of hand grenades on a Soviet submarine B-59 at the blockade line, unaware that it was armed with a nuclear tipped torpedo with orders that allowed it to be used if the submarine was hauled. If a hole in the hull from depth charges or surface fire, if they were fired upon, if they were shot, if there was a hole in their ship, then they had orders from the Kremlin, from Khrushchev, to go ahead and launch a nuclear weapon on the United States. The decision to launch these required agreement between three men. All three officers on board had to say, yes, let's launch this torpedo, nuclear-tipped torpedo, except for Vasily Arkhipov. So because he said no, he JFK and you got Khrushchev, they're playing some war games, right? They're just like, hey, you know, we got nuclear weapons and my nukes are bigger than your nukes, and essentially it's mutually assured destruction. One drops one, the other one drops another, then, you know, they blow up the whole country. And then there's I forget the name of the theory, but it's 100 nuclear bombs just explode, 100 nuclear weapons, and the big mushroom cloud will be big enough and it'll expand all over the entire world, thus blocking out the sun, and everything dies. Everybody dies, not just from the fallout from the nuclear weapons, but from the lack of sun. Without the sun, you can't, you know, that'll be the plants and the animals and the humans and, you know, grasshoppers and armadillos and sea otters, manatees, everything that's living would stop living without the sun. So that's what FK and Khrushchev were playing war games with nuclear weapons and about blew up the whole world and everybody and everything in it. Ernesto Che Guevara, he said direct aggression against Cuba would mean nuclear war if there was an invasion into Cuba. The Americans speak about such aggression as if they did not know or did not want to accept this fact. I have no doubt they would lose such a war. So that might be true. I think Americans are comfortable in their world. They have a strong military, but they themselves, I'm not for sure if, you know, I don't know. Going against a guerrilla, you know, a violent revolutionary guerrilla, you know, I'm not for sure. I think it'd be nuts. I don't know who would win. Nobody. That's October 1962. 1962, which is 3 years before Malcolm X was assassinated, 6 years before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated for fighting for the rights of garbage workers to unionize. And 7 years before Fred Hampton was assassinated by the FBI. You have FBI Special Agent Greg York. He said, we expected about 20 Panthers to be in the apartment when the police raided the place. Only 2 of those black niggers were killed. Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. This is FBI Special Agent Greg York. They went into Fred Hampton's apartment at about 4 or 5 in the morning. It was his right-hand man that eventually turned him in, and they give him a drug to where he was doped up and he wouldn't wake up, but he was still alive. But they
about the ongoing peace process in Colombia and the effort.
So he just mentioned about the destabilization of Venezuela. The United States is trying to destabilize it apparently, and so he's saying he's against the destabilization of Venezuela. He also mentioned the blockade, but he mentioned Guantanamo Bay. He said that Guantanamo Bay was illegally acquired by the United States. So they want Guantanamo Bay back. Obama wants to close Guantanamo Bay. This would be good for his legacy, good for Cuba.
International relations and world peace and stability. We defend human rights. In our view, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights.
Automatic gunfire then converged at the head of the south bedroom where Fred Hampton slept, unable to awaken as a result of the barbiturates. The FBI infiltrator had slipped into his drink. He was lying on a mattress in the bedroom with his fiancée, who was 8.5 months pregnant with their child. 2 officers found him wounded in the shoulder, and fellow Black Panther Harold Bell reported that he heard the following exchange. "That's Fred Hampton. Is he dead? Bring him out. He's barely alive. Oh, he'll make it." 2 shots were then heard, which were later discovered to be fired point blank into Fred Hampton's head. According to Johnson, one officer then said, "He's good and dead now." Fred Hampton's body was dragged into the doorway of the bedroom and left in a pool of blood. The officers then directed their gunfire towards the remaining Panthers who had been sleeping in the north bedroom, Satchel, Anderson, and Brewer. Oh, yeah, COINTELPRO, the FBI assassinated Fred Hampton. And for no reason, he didn't do anything. He was a provocateur, but the Black Panthers believed in self-defense. Most of the Black Panthers were either assassinated or imprisoned. And for what? Because they wanted to give them their young ones breakfast. So Fidel Castro, just some general information. Fidel Castro is actually still alive, which is kind of amazing. He's born in 1926. Fidel will be 90 years old this year. Fidel Castro is what makes Cuba Cuba. He is the face of Cuba, the monarch, the authoritarian monarch. The face, from 1959 to 2008 for almost 50 years. Then in 2008, Fidel Castro handed power to Raul Castro, Raul, his brother. Ricky Ricardo, Lucy's husband from I Love Lucy, the actress Lucille Ball, the TV show I Love Lucy. Her husband on that show was the actor known as Ricky Ricardo. So it was like, "Lucy, you got some splaining to do." He's Cuban. That's a Cuban. And oh, Ricky. That's my impersonations of Lucy and Ricky. Okay, so hurricane, canoe, barbecue, hurricane, canoe, hurricane, like a tsunami, barbecue, like, cooking, roasting, up some pork and mixing barbecue sauce in it. All those words are Taino words. Taino, which is the Arawak Native Americans on Cuba, before Christopher Columbus fucked everybody up and, genocided them. But hurricane, canoe, when you hear the words hurricane, canoe, barbecue, you should be like, Taino Indians. The Taino Indians, those are words that come from the Taino language. Barbecue, canoe, hurricane. 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 That's like my Louisville, right? You got to cut out the syllables. You just slow it down, and you just kind of, well, King Louis the 16th, Louisville. Oh yeah, Louisville. No, it's not Louisville. It's Louisville, and it's hurricane. Okay, hurricane. There's no I in it. Just hurricane. So hurricane, canoe, and barbecue. Taino. Anyways, fuck Christopher Columbus. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Donald Trump, I'm going to end on a quote. Donald Trump said this: part of the problem is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore. Part of the problem is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore.
Education, social security, food provision and development, equal pay, and the rights of children. We oppose political manipulation and double standards in the approach to human rights. Cuba has much to say and show on this issue. That is why I have reiterated to the President our willingness to continue moving forward with the dialogue on this matter that was already initiated. On December 17, 2014, as we announced the decision to reestablish diplomatic relations, I said that we should learn the art of coexisting.
To the easing of the Cuban embargo, we'll be able to smoke Cuban cigars now, or at least we can legally buy Cuban cigars and bring them here. Although the American law, the U.S. law, restricts travelers from Cuba to only bringing in $100 worth of alcohol or tobacco. So for a box of cigars, that's going to be more than $100. But you could buy a shelf load of $7 bottles of rum. So you could buy a shit ton of rum. Then the only problem you need to worry about is the airline weight restrictions. The airline weight restrictions might force you to choose between your rum or your clothes. So between the U.S. law, which says you can only have $100 worth of alcohol or tobacco, and then the weight restrictions, you can only bring so much back from Cuba. But eventually the Cuban cigar will be, I don't know, it's tobacco. Fuck tobacco. I don't know if that doesn't excite me much, but I don't know, it should be a free country. Cuba is 90 miles south of Florida. No American president has ever gone to Cuba since 1928. 1928, which is nearly, 90 to 100 years away. So 1928. It was Silent Cal, and Silent Cal went in there to try to convince the Cuban delegates to not pass anti-America legislation. And it was, a big fanfare type of thing. He went in on a battleship, the USS Texas, and said some things. He said no citizen of any of the Americas could come to the Queen of the Islands of the West Indies without experiencing an emotion of gratitude and reverence. Calvin Coolidge told the Pan-American Conference, it's the last and only year a sitting U.S. president ever visited Cuba. Ever. It's 90 miles south of Florida. What about Cuba has prevented American presidents from going and visiting? So it's kind of a long, complicated, sort of tale. But it's important, actually, because 1898, you had the Spanish-American War, and the Spanish-American War is when the United States became officially an empire. It's when we started collecting colonies. Supposedly, Spain and the native Cubans were fighting each other on Cuba, and we come in as a liberator, but we didn't leave. And so when there was a Constitution was written up for the people of Cuba, we had the Platt Amendment, I want to say. Some amendment was tacked onto it to where it said, yeah, you can run your own country and do your own thing and have self-government, blah, blah, blah. But if we want to invade or interfere or get into your internal politics, we're allowed to at any point, at any time. And that's why we still have Guantanamo Bay still today. It's on a lease, supposedly. There's a contract between the U.S. and Cuba. So we have a piece of Cuba.
The Cuban government and the Cuban people.
Buenas tardes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
For the welcome that you've extended to me, to my family, and to my delegation. For more than half a century, the sight of a U.S. president here in Havana would have been unimaginable. But this is a new day. Es un nuevo día. between our two countries.
A new day.
With your indulgence, Mr. President, I want to go just briefly off topic because during this weekend I received news that one of our outstanding United States armed service members, Marine Staff Sergeant Louis F. Carden of Temecula, California, was killed in northern Iraq as we assisted Iraq.
After the Spanish-American War, the United States was victorious. They conquered Spain. This is Teddy Roosevelt, the Battle of San Juan Hill, and then you have William Randolph Hearst. There was the quote, he sent some photojournalists down there, and they said, take pictures of the conflict, and said, well, there's no conflict, and he's like, it doesn't matter, just take some photos, you furnish the photos, and I'll furnish the war. So William Randolph Hearst used yellow journalism to get America to get into the war. It started off on a false pretense. The USS Maine, which was harbored on the side of Cuba, probably in Havana, and Havana is like the Las Vegas. It used to be a big party town. It was Las Vegas before Las Vegas began. But the USS Maine blows up, and they are blamed even though Cuba had nothing to do with it. It was just an internal thing that just happened. So have we won the Iraq War? Have we lost it? We're still there. There's still a U.S. embassy. ISIS is coming up. We're still defending. We're still fighting. There's no combat troops. It's not an invasion. But there's security forces and anti-terrorism forces there. So we're actually escalating the Iraq War right now because of that ISIS attack he just talked about.
They have friends at home and they have things to do, but they wanted to come to Cuba because they understood and we wanted to show them the beauty of Cuba and its people. We were moved by the Cubans who
is a new day.
Smiling and waving as we drove in from the airport. We were grateful for the opportunity to experience old Havana and some excellent Cuban food. Our visit to the cathedral was a reminder of the values that we share, the deep faith that sustains.
The Spanish-American War is important for two main reasons. One is that it started off on a false pretense, just like when President Polk said that we needed to invade Mexico and start the Mexican-American War because they were firing and shooting at our soldiers, but our soldiers was ordered to invade their land and they was on their territory. So who's right, who's wrong? If they're invading, then that means they were protecting themselves and they weren't firing on the troops like just to invade and shoot at the troops, but because out of self-defense reasons. So is the Mexican-American War, Vietnam, the Iraq War, many times we've started wars over the false pretense. It almost seems like the pretense doesn't even matter. World War I, it's just like they want to go to war and they'll just make up any reason to go. It's good for their numbers. It excites the people. They're a war president, and especially if they're victorious, Reagan can blow up Grenada and say, I'm a hero. Non-stop fucking Bush or Trump, Donald, Trump, stop, Trump. John Kasich, Ted Cruz is a creepy fucking weirdo. Any Republican that chooses Ted Cruz is a sick fuck, okay? Donald Trump is better than Ted Cruz, just in terms of creepiness. Did y'all see that video where he tried to kiss his daughter, and his daughter's like, yeah, and he's like, no, I'm going to kiss you anyways. He's a creep. He's a fucking weirdo. So that's one reason to understand the Spanish-American War, is to know that it started off on a lie. It was false pretense. It was bullshit. And then the other thing to know is that that's when we became officially an empire. We were a republic, which just means it's just, our 50 states and that's it. But we have 900 military bases in 153 countries today. So we're an empire. Clearly, obviously, anybody that has any eyes knows that we're an empire. And it's not talking shit. That's just acknowledging, a truth that's real. And the reason why that's important is because we weren't taking colonies and taking over territories anymore, because we knew how we felt when the British tried to do that to us. And so we wouldn't conquer other nations just to take their resources and their land. But after the Spanish-American War, we got Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines, and Cuba, and we kept them. So it's like a gas or propane place right here in Somerset, Pulaski County. It's a cross tour Honda Accord. Porta potties, fucking shelters. This guy's B Silverado 7Z71. Arby's. I'm gonna check out that Reuben. I like the commercial. Fucking commercial sold me out of, or sold me on it. Man, this guy was like right on my fucking bumper, man. I wonder what he's doing. You got tired of waiting for a second. He's the asshole. So the Reuben, that commercial, is like, you ever see two animals together and you're like, why are they together? Why would a monkey want to hang out? So the fact that the United States government is an empire has kind of been a relative recent phenomenon. Some argue that the entire time we've been an empire since we've been taking over other people's land and living on it, and I think that that's important to realize it. But for the government to actually start to branch out and to, it's different. I think it's a little bit different. It's like a conscious decision to take over other people's land, not find land for yourself, but just to be a world power and be like, you know, we're the fucking main empire. And so it's Cuba, you know, the biggest fucking country. Just go 90 miles south of Florida. He called it the queen of the islands of the West Indies because it's the biggest, fattest fucking country. There's hundreds or thousands of West Indies islands. There's Dominican Republic and Haiti and Virgin Islands and I think Puerto Rico. So, I mean, there's like a shit ton of fucking islands. The Florida Keys, right? And,
should stop him. And it's hard for
so fuck Ted Cruz. John Kasich is exciting. He can win with the broker convention. So, you know, run, John, run. He'll, if anything, expose the holes in the system. And he actually is a better establishment candidate than Donald Trump is. I mean, he's been in politics. He knows how to sort of, he hasn't been a dick. You know, he's polite. He's nice. So after 1898, we got Puerto Rico, Philippines, Guam, Cuba. We had to put down the Philippines pretty strong, so we kept the territories, and we wound up being imperialist. Mark Twain was part of the anti-imperialist league. But we still have Guam, Puerto Rico, and a chunk of Cuba today. So then we eventually ended. The Platt Amendment allowed us to intervene anytime we felt like it. And the only time that Calvin Coolidge visited Cuba was in 1928. So of course Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, the Cuban Revolution had a lot of the reasons for why nobody ever visited Cuba from that. But that was 1959, you know, so for the last 60 or 70 years. But why 1928? The only sitting president, so not Washington, not Jefferson, not Madison, nobody visited Cuba ever for any reason until Calvin Coolidge in
to Jose Marti, not only his role in Cuban independence, but the profound words that he wrote and spoke in support of liberty and freedom.
So he talked about Jose Marti, and he mentioned the Pope. I cut out the Pope or whatever, but he says that the Pope was supportive. He didn't really say, but he actually the one that brought them together, the Pope did.
Democrats and Republicans, this is the largest such delegation of my presidency, and it indicates the excitement and interest in America about the process that we've undertaken. These members of Congress recognize that our new relationship with the Cuban people is in the interest of both nations. I'm also joined by some of America's top business leaders and entrepreneurs because we're ready to pursue more commercial ties which create jobs and opportunity for Cubans and Americans alike.
Who is Calvin Coolidge? They nickname him Silent Cal. So Silent Cal went to Havana in January 16th, 1928. And Coolidge and his wife, some dumpy, you know, disgusting old broad, mean as shit too, mean. Silent Cal went with to meet Cuba's president, Geraldo Machado, who was in office from 1925 to 1933 until he was forced to exile. So he was coup d'etat. At the time, 1928, Benito Mussolini ruled Italy. Months before Coolidge's visit to Cuba, Leon Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Communist Party, leaving Joseph Stalin in control. About a month after that, Iraq began negotiating independence with Britain. That's what's going on in 1928, to give you a sense of, you know, This is plenty of years. 1898 is when we became an empire. Then 30 years later, Silent Cal goes to Cuba, essentially to Assange, to smooth out the sentiments that the Cuban government was feeling about the United States and be like, hey, everybody, we're all equals here. We're all brothers. And so Silent Cal went to Cuba, made a speech to act like the United States, even though we believed in the Monroe Doctrine and intervened whenever the fuck we felt like it. He wanted to sort of allay their fears that they didn't feel like they were superior, or we didn't feel like we were superior and better than other people, that we thought everybody was equal. So that was the point. There was some legislation that was going to be against it, so he made a speech to go against that. So he wanted to, emphasize to Latin America, hey, guy, we're all cool. He rode in a presidential rail car without air conditioning to Key West, USS Texas. And that's pretty much it. The last thought I want to leave you with, Ted Cruz is Cuban, and his father actually fought on the side of Fidel Castro, so he was a Cuban revolutionary, which is amazing. That's some major street cred, being a revolutionary in today's, society. I'm sure they talk shit about Cuba and the authoritarian nature of Fidel Castro, but Ted Cruz's father fought on the side of Fidel Castro, supposedly not side by side, but with the 26th of July movement. The 26th of July movement, which is, Fidel Castro tried to start a movement against Batista, and it failed, and then he came back and then eventually took the whole thing over.